Hello, everyone, and welcome to, oops, wait, I forgot one thing. There we go. Put the video up.
You look great.
Thank you. Welcome to Financial Reporting to Management Reporting. Reporting gets an upgrade. My name is Paul Lewis, and I'm a senior consultant here at interRel Consulting. I've been working in the Hyperion EPM space for over 10 years now. Throughout the presentation, you can ask questions in the Q&A box in Zoom, and we will try to get to all those questions at the end. Before we get to the presentation, some quick notes about interRel. I'm not going to read through everything here. You can see it all yourself. interRel has been around for a long time now, and we are a leader in the as you can see, we do webcasts, we have books, we've been doing virtual conferences like this one, all sorts of great stuff. We are passionate about making the world a smarter place. So let's get to our presentation. Today we will be talking about EPM reporting is getting an upgrade and moving from financial reporting to management reporting. So you might be asking, what is management reporting? Often referred to as MR, basically it's the eventual replacement for legacy Hyperion financial reporting, otherwise known as FR. While we know that eventually FR will be retired and fully replaced by MR, we do not know when that complete transition will take place. Oracle plans to introduce a light version of MR that will be part of EPM Planning. This light version could be available by the end of this calendar year. For our presentation today, we'll be looking at the full version that is part of narrative reporting. Features are added almost monthly that continue to bring MR closer to parity with FR. Editing reports is clean and easy to navigate. If you've designed in FR, adapting to MR is not difficult, but there are some differences to be aware of. Something I find really cool is being able to incorporate MR reports into narrative reporting packages. This allows us to develop awesome looking packages that can combine data from EPM as well as non-EPM sources. We will not be going into details about narrative. There are other sessions that are covering that aspect of the product. So let's take a look here at the home page for narrative reporting. We can see the familiar layout that all the EPM cloud home pages have these days. And we have our reports here. We can go to books, bursting, and the library. I typically go to the library as that includes all of I think of it as the equivalent of the repository in FR. Personally, I really like the clean look of the interface. Similar to the FR repository, folders can be created. You can see a few folders down here in the left side pane. Books and bursting are accessible from here as well. Have the books there, bursting definitions. Once you create a book or a burst, you can save that result in a folder, or you can access it from the books and bursting respective folders. Okay, there we go. All right, so let's take a look at a sample report. And we'll see how this goes here. Start that. Okay, so the POV, we're going to open this report, sample report 1. And the POV can be edited by clicking on individual dimensions or the meatballs on the right side. Give the cursor a second to get up there. There's the meatballs. Using the meatballs brings up the POV dimensions available to change. Take a look at the calendar dimension. And this should look familiar from other EPM cloud interfaces. can also select the member from the POV bar, go into the calendar again. So pretty basics. Then we go over to the action gear. That's where we can find other functionality. We can change the report to PDF view. Then we can go back to HTML. Also from the gear icon, we can download the report in PDF, or we can download it in Excel. Keep in mind the Excel report from here is static. It does not have a connection to the data source. Report editor can also be accessed, as well as changing how the member names are displayed and which alias table to use. Let's take a look at editing a report. I think this is one of the best improvements in MR over FR. The interface is easy to navigate and more responsive. I think it's just flat out better to use than FR. We can go into editing directly from the report by clicking on the pencil icon. It's going to bring up our main page. Layout has sections for header, body, and footer. The report parameters like margins and orientation are over in that right side pane. All the usuals, margins, fit to page, borders. If we hover over an object, we can get that pencil icon and edit the object. Open up this text box, and we have the usual functions there. You can change your color, your text size, the font. Then you also have the text functions. Go over to the right there, and it's a little FX. Pull up the text functions. This should look somewhat familiar to FR. Syntax might be a little different. And we'll close out of there. Now we'll take a look at a data grid. There's a lot to cover on the data grid. Find the pencil, open that up. If you've designed an FR, this should look similar, yet it also looks different. I think it's much cleaner look and easier to navigate. The POV header has dimensions that apply to the whole grid. These can be set with specific members, substitution variables, or a list of members. An exciting new feature added recently is the ability to use user variables in the dimension member selection. I think this is another improvement over FR. If we open up the calendar dimension, just look at this briefly. This one's set for bottom members. You can delete that, change it, edit it, whatever you need to do for your selections for the POV member. And to get out of it, we close out and then click anywhere outside the POV window, and it'll take you back to the main page. The data layout in this sample has accounts on the rows and scenarios in the columns, same as what you're going to see in FR. But if you want to change that layout, you go to the layout icon, which is the bullseye looking circles, and you click on that. And now we're into a drag and drop situation. You can drag between the POV and the columns and the rows. And we'll bring the years down to the columns. To get out of here, we click that icon again. That'll take us back out, and you can see the years are in the columns where you can now select members unique to each column. Take a look at the options in the right side pane. The first tab here is the General tab, General Settings. Here's where you're going to set the data source. I want to go through this a little more specific because it's so easy to navigate and change this in MR compared to FR. Changing the data source in FR is not not that easy, not as easy as this. If you have if you have a report with multiple data grids, you can have each one point into a different data source. I've gotten in the habit when I'm designing, I'll set my data source to the production environment. It makes validation a little bit easier. You can see the other general settings here. You have suppression. This is going to apply to the whole grid. You have text options, the usual type stuff that you would have found in FR, just laid out a little different. Let's look at the column tab. Select a column to see what's available. The column can be hidden or suppressed. Same with the row. When we go to the row, it's going to be the same type of options here. Then if you go into the cell, you can change your cell settings. You can select one or multiple cells. You can select a whole row or a whole column or the whole grid and apply the settings for the cells. Change your number format, your font, all that type of editing there. You can replace text if you want. Okay, and then you also have from here the sorting for row and column sorting. Not going to get into that right now. Next tab I think is an important one, conditional properties. We're going to see differences here compared to FR. When a row or column or cell is selected, conditional properties can be applied. You can also create the condition prior to selecting the row, column, or cell. So what this means is you can set up all your conditions, whether it's formatting or suppressions, and you don't have to have a row or column selected when you're creating that condition. And then you can go back in at any point, and when you select a row, column, or cell, you can apply whatever that conditional, whatever you have available to select from. So we're going to go through setting a format condition. I'm going to use a different sample report that already has some conditions set. You would just click on the condition name to open it. If you want to create a new one, you go to the plus icon there and you would create a new one. We're going to look and see what we have here under the settings for what's described as green. And pulls up this window, and we have our conditions, the parameters to set for that condition. Look at what's available to use. And then once you figure that out, then you decide what's going to happen if that condition's met, whether it's changing the cell color, replacing text, whatever that might be. As in FR, you can add multiple conditions and use and or for the conditions, and then group those conditions together. We'll add a couple more just for a quick sample to show how to group those conditions. What I'm adding here really isn't going to make sense. I'm just trying to get them in to have multiple to select from. Once you have your conditions, you can select multiple by using the control key and clicking on each row to group. Go to the action gear and group the expression. And there you have it. Okay, so let's cancel this real quick, and then we're going to go back in so we can look at the next feature, which I think is really cool, and part of this is not in FR. In addition to or instead of formatting the text when conditions are met, you can apply conditional text and analytics. It's like conditional formatting, but with narrative instead. So you have your definition there, what's going to happen if the condition is met. And this analytics ability is new. This is not available in FR. We're going to look at the full report to see what that does. So we run that full report. We have a hyperlink now. And when the user clicks on that hyperlink, it's going to pull up a supporting report. And what's great is this supporting report is created on the fly. I think this feature alone can take a whole presentation. There are a few more steps to doing it than what I've shown you, but I think you get the gist of it. This on-the-fly report, we can drill in here and get more detail on some specifics. I think this is going to turn out to be one of the best add-on features available. Quick note about this, you can only do this when you're in HTML view. This won't work from the PDF view. Okay. Whoops. So let's look at some other functionality now. As in FR, MR has bursting now, which means a report or a book can be set up to run with multiple member selections. You have that those definitions up here. You would select your bursting POV dimension. On this one, we have segments. We have our global dimension set for the fiscal calendar dimension. Note that at this time, you can't use substitution variables in these selections. That is a known bug and it is being worked on. The bursted report can be emailed to a distribution list or saved to a folder in the library, or both. You can see in this sample we have email and library checked off, so we can do both. You have here, you can upload a CSV file with a distribution list. You can set emails to go out to specific people for successes and failures. In the email, or the saved copy, you can put what the name of the report is going to end up being. We have, in this one, you're using artifact description, and then the alias from the segments that are being bursted. One significant difference to point out here compared to FR is scheduling. Right now, in FR, scheduling is built in, but in MR, you can only schedule if you use the file transfer utility. It's a narrative reporting tool similar to EPM Automate. Oracle does plan to incorporate scheduling within MR in the future. We just don't know when that's going to happen. So once you've created your bursting definition, the report can be executed from the gear icon. We'll jump back here. So that's up here in this the right-hand corner. There's the gear icon. So when you select that, you get your execute. This sample, we're saving the reports to the samples folder and then a subfolder within there. And like I was describing before, here's the report name. That's the description of the report, and the segment name that is bursting on each segment. It's appended there. Moving on, I mentioned before a tool in narrative reporting called File Transfer Utility. This tool is similar to EPM Automate, but not as easy to use. Fortunately, Oracle has recently added narrative reporting to EPM Automate. While EPM Automate has a number of commands available now for narrative reporting, it does not yet have full parity with File Transfer Utility. You can see in this listing for each tool the differences at this time. A lot of these EPM Automate commands that you see here, these are applicable to other EPM Cloud applications, not just planning or narrative reporting. Then you have the File Transfer Utility and what's available within that. Point out one here that I find very useful, the download file. There it is in File Transfer Utility and over here in EPM Automate. As soon as that was available in EPM Automate, I created a process for my client to download the daily snapshot. If you're not doing that already in your various EPM Cloud products, you should be. It's important to have backups available in case you need to re-import the application. Seems like we have covered a lot already, but we still have more to go through. One of the capabilities that had been lacking in MR compared to FR was Smart View functionality. That has recently been corrected. MR now has Smart View capability. As mentioned earlier, MR reports can be exported from the web into Excel, but doing it that way, the reports are not connected. They are static. They're not connected to a data source. So now that we have Smart View available, a user can import the report. This is a fully connected report that can be updated with POV selections and refreshed. There are some oddities at this time. For example, when you import a report, a new workbook is opened instead of using a sheet in the existing workbook that you may have open. So what that's doing is, if a lot of users will have a workbook that has multiple FR reports in it, on each tab has a separate report, and you're able to refresh each one independently as needed. So currently in MR, that's not working the way we want it to, and Oracle is aware of this, and they're working to get it within MR to work similar to how FR does, so you can have a workbook with multiple MR reports. The toolbar here has the refresh report, edit POV, and analyze, which will open another sheet with an ad hoc query. For any of this to work, you need to install the narrative reporting extension in SmartView. You want to make sure you pay attention to the monthly updates that Oracle sends out. Anytime they add functionality to SmartView for narrative reporting, you're going to have to upgrade your extension to take advantage of that. So just be aware of that. So let's summarize some of the differences between FR and MR. Some of the big ones to me were bursting and SmartView. So having those now in MR I think is great. However, we still don't have scheduling unless you use the file transfer utility. So I think that's still a negative against it, but we're getting there. EPM Automate is definitely a plus, as is user variables. A note about same as functionality. In FR, when designing a report, if you recall, you can use same as to reference another row or column to get that dimension member. Though this doesn't exist in MR, I haven't found that to be a negative. Same can be said for saved objects and row and column templates. You may have a different use case where converting reports without this ability is going to be problematic. But to what I've seen so far, I don't think it's that big of an issue. I haven't had a need to reference objects or row and column templates at this point. I also want to be clear about what I'm saying here on multiple data sources. This is Financial Reporting Cloud that I'm referencing. As you know, in FR on-prem, you can have multiple data sources, but this is FR Cloud that we're comparing. MR Cloud does have multiple data sources. We can include data sources to planning, FCC, tax reporting, profitability and cost management, Essbase Cloud, Fusion Applications, Essbase Provider, and Essbase Analytic Provider Services. With each monthly update by Oracle, MR is gaining parity with FR and often adding features not available in FR. And that's going to lead us to our next topic. So why should you consider migrating to MR now instead of waiting? Well, full parity with FR is within reach. It's possible by the end of this calendar year. And while both products will be available together to give customers plenty of time to convert, I believe it's better to do so sooner rather than later. The client I'm currently with decided to migrate from FR to MR back in April. To be honest, it was frustrating at times. I encountered a fair number of bugs and couldn't get several reports to convert correctly right away. But the narrative reporting team at Oracle has been working aggressively to fix issues, get parity with FR, and introduce improvements. 6 months ago, I would have recommended you wait to migrate, but we're at a point now that I'd say it's a good time to start. And the sooner you start, the more time you have to, if there are any issues that you were to encounter, it gives you ample time to get them corrected before the full transition takes place. So let's walk through those general steps to migrate. It really is pretty straightforward. You export the reports from FR and you import them into MR, and then you validate. So from FR, you can export reports individually, or you can group them together into one zip file, whatever you're most comfortable with, really. And you save that file or files on a local computer. Then we go over into MR, and before we import those files, we want to create our data source. And we want to create the data source with the same name as the FR reports being imported. We get there by going into the library, and we can see the data source object here in the left-hand pane. Then we would go to the plus icon and select data source. That's going to open up the window to create the data source. Put in the same name as your FR data source and everything else required. Test your connection and save it. If you skip this step, you can still import the reports, but they're going to fail on validation. And then each one will need to be updated with a valid data source. So it's just easier if you do this ahead of time to get that out of the way. I actually learned this the hard way. I was migrating a handful of reports. I just set up a new data source with a new name, not thinking about what was coming in from FR. So each of those reports failed. Then I realized quickly, oh, if I set the name use the same name as what's in FR, this will work a lot easier. And that's how I did the rest of my migration. Then once you've set your data source, in MR, you go to the reports folder here and go over and click on the gear icon and scroll to get import and select import. That brings up your import window. You would select the file that you're going to import. If you export it multiple, you'll have to do this for each file. You want to leave the import location checked for same as export location. That'll create the same folder structure that you had in FR. You're also going to want to leave overwrite existing objects and include access permissions checked. Then you do your import, and once all the reports are imported, to validate, you go in and you open each one. If there's any errors, you're going to get an error box at a window that pops open. Some of the common errors include functions that reference columns, rows, and POVs. This one has that the text box was not fitting within the header of the report, so you would have to resize that. It had an error on a font. There is the ability to upload font libraries. I'm not going to get into that. That is available though. This also had a text function error. The syntax in the text function was off, so that has to be corrected. That was one of the more common errors I found in my migration, was the member name and member alias used in text functions. Once I get those validation errors corrected, I usually spot check the report against the FR report. This is where it's helpful to have your data source pointing to prod. That way, if you run your FR report out of production, you know the data is valid from there, and if your MR report is using production as a source, your data should tie out. Here's a brief listing of some of the odd errors I've encountered either in migration or afterwards. These have all been resolved. Like I said before, the narrative reporting team at Oracle, they have been just fantastic, super responsive. Any issues that we've run across, they're on it immediately, whether I open an SR or some of them I just post on Customer Connect, and one of the product manager people will jump on there within a half hour 60 minutes and ask a couple questions and either say, open an SR for this, or yes, we're aware of the issue and we are working on it. So that is my presentation. So let's open it up for questions in our remaining time. Remember, you can place those questions in the Q&A in the Zoom window.
So Paul, it looks like you had one question, but it sounds like you answered it. So the question—
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah, can existing FR reports be edited in MR going forward, or will reports need to be recreated in MR?
I'm sorry, can you say that again?
Yes, can existing FR reports be edited in MR going forward, or will reports need to be recreated in MR?
So you shouldn't need to recreate the report. You should be able to, like I showed, export it out of FR and import it into MR. I should have noted there are certain things that will not import that you do need to recreate. That would be any report books, any bursting definitions. Those artifacts will not import. You have to recreate those in MR. But in general, you should be able to export the FR report and import it into MR and then validate it, and everything should be fine.
Fantastic. All right, any other questions for Paul? Okay, here's one. Does this apply to cloud only, or is on-prem FR changing too?
This only applies to cloud. I'm not aware of what's going on with FR on-prem. I've been focused on cloud now for a while, so I haven't been keeping up with updates to the on-prem world.
Okay, all right, fair enough. And then another question, MR is so similar to FR. I'm wondering why the name changed. Is this a completely new product, or is Oracle just changing the name to focus less on finance and now more company-wide?
I can't speculate why the name changed, but as far as the product itself, it is brand new. It's a different architecture and different technology behind it, so it's not the same as FR. The way it functions in the background, the technical aspects of it. So maybe that led to the change in name, or that it's part of the larger narrative reporting world, and it better sits in there with the name management reporting.
Right, of course, that makes sense. Okay, good. Any other questions for Paul?
Oh, and I should have shown, make sure you get your swag.
That's right, looking good. Dark side of the cube, the pandemic tour swag. So
yeah, I don't have my coffee mug handy, or I'd show that off too.
Awesome. EPM.vi/swag, and you can get all of your pandemic tour memorabilia. All right, Paul, well, thank you so much. That was a very informative presentation. I know all of the participants were probably very, very interested in everything you shared, so thank you.
Okay, thanks everybody for joining, and enjoy the rest of the conference.